Dear scholars, we meet again on our online class regarding research techniques and concepts. And today we are going to discuss the selections of the specified verbs to be used while constructing or formulating your specific objectives. The selections of the proper verbs, the verbs that fits to the intended goals, is of significant importance. It has been a business as usual, where individual tends to use the common terms that they normally find in literatures and in some of the research. And they also use the way they are without even knowing to why they are using those terms or verbs. You can find an individual is intending to assess or to make a study on a particular parameter, but he cannot even differentiate why should I use the term to assess? Why should I use the verb to evaluate? Why should I use the verb to determine? But by his default mechanism, he simply writes his or her objectives, maybe to assess awareness, to evaluate awareness, to determine awareness, or to quantify awareness. Sometimes there are those challenges of which is a common mistakes among us. And therefore today I'm going to highlight you some of the important verbs with the specified levels of measurements. Which level of measurement do we need to use a particular verb? This verb is used to a particular level of measurements. Therefore, with such a simple description with this, our today's online classes, you will be in a good position. And at the end of the day, you will be stating your specific objectives with the right verbs that fits to the intended measurements, objectives or goals of your study. Kwa mantikio, imekuwa ni kawaida kwa walio wengi, unakuta tu mtu anaamua kutumia tu neno assess, neno evaluate, neno determine, bila hata kujua anachokwenda kukipima kama kinaweza kikaendana na hilo neno alilolitumia wakati anaformulate ile hypothesis. Kwa mazingira hayo unajikuta unatengeneza kitu ambacho sio sahihi sana ukiangalia kile ambacho umeintend kukipima. Why are we doing this today's class? We know there are different levels of measurement while carrying out our study or our research. There are also different domains to be measured. Which are we going to measure in our study? And at the same time, we have different data acquisition protocol. Kwa sababu ya utofauti wa hizo data acquisition protocol, utofauti wa level of measurement, utofauti wa domain ambayo unaenda kuipima, hata zile verbs ambazo zinatumika while constructing your objectives, lazima uziangalie kwa makini sana. Makosa hayo madogo madogo ndio yanapelekea tunajikuta tunapotea na tunaingia kwenye makosa ambayo yanakuja kutuadhibu sisi wenyewe wakati tunafanya data analysis. Any mistake that you can make during construction of your objectives, where maybe you use the term assess, of which it was not required to be there, and it was supposed to be to evaluate. This could be a big mistake of which it will give you into a big areas while making your data analysis. Such mistakes, we make them in the beginning, and they will give us a burden on another stage, like on data analysis. Before we go into details, please, I request you to do what we say. You subscribe if it's your first time to get into this particular online class. While subscribing, you will find this a bell. Please touch on it, notified, click it, so that wherever I upload any video, you'll get notified. And I also I request you to subscribe, share, and like this video if it's at all providing you some relevant and shoes. I therefore continue. We have this common term or common verbs to be used regarding levels of measurements and other like. I am now taking you to the table that I have prepared, from which it will be showing you a specified verb, a specified level of measurements. For this particular area, let me share you with the other parameter here from which we are going to discuss today. I share this once again. Right. These are the common verbs of which we are going to use to discuss today while we are trying to develop our specific objectives. Before we go into the detail, I have this caution. There are some terms of which I advise you not to use them while formulating your hypothesis. Your specific objectives. These are often used but are open to many interpretations. The use of the term maybe to appreciate, to have faith in, to know. How are you going to measure to know? To understand, to believe. These are some of the verbs which have found some people they tend to use while trying to construct their specific objectives. They are not good at all, and they do not portray a proper information of which is against what we call the SMART, specific, measurable, time frames, and like. And these are some of the terminologies or the verbs of which I advise you to use. And the usability of these verbs will depend on the level from which you are going to assess. We have different levels. We have the cognitive domain. Under cognitive domain, we have to, which are you going to learn? Are you going to measure knowledge? Going to measure comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation, and like. And also we have the so-called psychomotor domain. This is so practical in nature, from which we will be looking on the motor skills. And there to that particular, we have the terms to be, verbs to be used. And your study might be making analysis, or you are evaluating, you are making a study on effective domain, where we'll be looking on receive, response, value, organization, and the characterization. To that particular area, also we have some terms of which, or verbs that we need to know. While formulating your specific objectives now is up to you. It's up to you and your study. That which study am I doing? Am I doing on effective domain? Am I doing my study on psychomotor related study? Am I doing the study on cognitive? Under this cognitive domain, we have several verbs of which you can use. Under knowledge, you will find the verb like to characterize, to cite, to count, to define, to describe, to draw, to identify, to indicate, to label, to match, to name, to outline, to record, to relate, to reproduce, to select, to state, to tabulate, etc., etc. This you can put them there and go through this. When you are looking for the comprehension, these are some of the verbs: to associate, to classify, to compare, to differentiate, to distinguish, to paraphrase, to express, to illustrate, to generate, etc., etc. When you will be doing your study related to application-related parameters, you go for to apply, to calculate, to quantify, to change, to demonstrate, to illustrate, to manipulate, to modify, to order, to practice, to predict, to relate, to prepare, to report, to restart, to review, etc., etc. When you're doing some issues related to analysis, you go to analyze. It's where you find most of people, they use the term to analyze without even knowing which level of measurement he or she doing, to determine the common terms, to differentiate, to discriminate, to distinguish, to experiment, etc., etc. When you are doing on synthesis, maybe your study is so broader to an extent of making synthesis, is where we find terms like to arrange, to assemble, to categorize, to codify. Those are doing coding, for example, in computer-related studies, to codify, to correct, to combine, to compile, to design, to develop, to detect. Maybe you are doing some development of a particular using project or using software to be implemented. So you simply say to develop, to formulate, to generalize, to modify, to organize, to prepare, to propose, to rearrange, to construct, to whatever. These are some of the verbs of which they're very useful. You go for evaluation, you speak about to appraise, to choose, to compare, to contrast, to criticize, to determine, to estimate, to explain, to justify, to evaluate, to grade, to interpret, to judge, to measure, etc., etc. When you go to psychological related domain, of which it's so manual in nature, which is motor skills, it's so practical. Some of the terms while stating or formulating your hypothesis, your specific objective, use terms like to articulate, to diagnose, to hold, to measure, to interpret, to pass, to pursue, to project, to visualize. You see, when doing issues related to affective domain, you have also some specific verbs. On receiving, maybe you do to ask. Maybe your objectives intending to ask people about a particular phenomenon. So to ask, to choose, to describe, to give, to identify, to locate, to name, to pick, to point, to select, to reply, to use, to aid, to answer, to assist, to confirm, to discuss, to help, to label, to perform, to practice, to present, to read, to recite, to complete, to describe, to differentiate, etc., etc., to adhere, to add, to arrange, to assemble, to combine, to compare, to defend, to explain, to generalize, to modify, to order, to organize, to prepare, to relate. Then you continue with what you are intending to do. So these are some of the verbs of which I find myself that is relevant for you to share. You can be pausing a video and go through, and then from this particular some terms is where you are going to find yourselves that which is so fitting into your specific objectives, which verb to use, rather than using the common terms which might be not specifying or fitting into your study. Suppose we are doing a study on designing, but you use the word to determine, of which is not relevant to your study. With this few user of the terms, I hope you might have got what it was the problems with you before. I say thank you again for your time. Please notify yourselves by subscribing my YouTube, sharing the information for others so that they got the same information. Thank you for today. Ninakutakia usiku mwema, mchana mwema, wewe ambaye uko sehemu nyingine ambapo sasa hivi ni mchana na usiku, na weekend njema kama kawaida. Alamsiki, tukutane tena kipindi kijacho. Bye bye.